I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. President-elect Donald Trump has agreed to settle fraud lawsuits over Trump University for $25 million. The suits allege the university failed to deliver the quality real estate investing education it had promised. The deal doesn't require Mr. Trump to acknowledge wrongdoing. President Obama is blocking the sale of new drilling rights in the Arctic and the Atlantic for 5 years. Oil and gas companies have been seeking new offshore options. Alaska Republican Lisa Murkowski, chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, joined the rest of her state's congressional delegation in criticizing the move, calling it, quote, short-sighted. Since a ceasefire collapsed in Syria nearly 2 months ago, more than 1,000 people have died in the besieged city of Aleppo. That's according to a monitoring group. The death toll includes more than 230 children. About three-quarters of those deaths were in rebel-held areas. Turkey's state-run news agency says 76 academics have been detained at a university in Istanbul. It's part of the ongoing investigation into the movement allegedly responsible for that attempted coup back in July. The government's arrested nearly 37,000 people and fired or suspended 100,000 more from government jobs. In New York, I'm Mark Crumpton. Bloomberg Technology is next.
I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, President-elect Trump is picking his team, but his choices won't please those looking for post-election moderation. We'll discuss the impact on Silicon Valley. Plus, social media under fire. Facebook and Twitter have very different ways of handling the post-election backlash. We'll take a look at both. And the backlog of companies ready to go public is growing, but Trump's uncertain policies could be bad news for tech IPOs. First to our lead. What happens to U.S. cyber and national security policies with Trump in the White House? It is a key question after the president-elect named Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions as Attorney General and Kansas Congressman Mike Pompeo as head of the CIA. Former military intelligence chief Michael Flynn will be national security advisor. So what do they stand for? What happens to the strong bridge the White House built between Washington and Silicon Valley? Remember, Obama appointed the nation's first CTO. First chief data scientist. Both the president and members of the cabinet visited the Valley multiple times. Obama attended the tech-heavy South by Southwest Interactive Festival, hosted a Reddit Q&A, held Twitter town halls, and seemed to have a direct line to Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, and Tim Cook. Joining us now for more on Washington's future ties with Silicon Valley, Bill Ferries, who leads Bloomberg News' team of reporters covering national security, and Jonathan Aberman, founder of Amplifier Ventures, based in D.C., who has worked with DARPA, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Defense on national security issues. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Bill, I'll start with you. You lead the team of reporters in our D.C. bureau covering national security. Walk us through these picks and what they mean for the issues that Silicon Valley cares about, whether it's privacy, security, or immigration.
Thanks, Emily. I mean, after some fits and starts this week, we saw Donald Trump pick three very strong personalities for his national security team. There's a couple more openings to come. But to start with the CIA, you have Mike Pompeo, Kansas Republican congressman, really cut his teeth on the Benghazi investigations and was perhaps the harshest critic of Hillary Clinton throughout those hearings that the committee had. You have Michael Flynn, whose appointment to National Security Advisor, remember, he does not need Senate confirmation, has raised a lot of questions with Democrats about conflicts of interest. He has admitted accepting money from Russia's state-owned media outlet. He has business ties to people affiliated with the Turkish government. So a lot of questions are being raised, but there's not a lot that Democrats can do to stop that appointment. And then finally, Jeff Sessions, who first came to national attention almost 30 years ago when he was unable to win Senate confirmation for some of the racial comments he made, subsequently became a senator, is well regarded as someone who knows a lot, who focuses on the details. But remember, this is a guy who will be in charge of enforcing U.S. civil rights laws. And for many people, his appointment would raise a lot of concerns. I think a lot of this will come out in the confirmation hearings. But again, with Flynn, we'll never get to that step because he doesn't require confirmation.
Exactly. Now, with Michael Flynn, Jonathan, you actually worked with him at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Talk to us a little bit about what he's like and what he means for these issues that we're talking about.
Well, I didn't work directly with General Flynn. I worked with his chief innovation officer at the time in connection with how to get entrepreneurs more engaged in national security. So that's my exposure to General Flynn. And I think that his experience is, and it's indicative of, say, Ash Carter's experience with Secretary of Defense, there's a big need for innovators in Silicon Valley and elsewhere to engage in national security because a lot of threats we face are viral, they're small teams. So I think that you're going to see in General Flynn somebody who understands that is an issue, and for people that are worrying about whether or not the innovation outreach efforts of Secretary Carter will continue, I think this is a good first sign that the national security establishment is going to continue to need and reach out to innovators.
Now, Bill, a lot of the conversation around Jeff Sessions has focused on potentially racist remarks made a long time ago, but he also has some very strong views on immigration. He's against a path to citizenship. He's very supportive of the wall that Donald Trump repeatedly talked about building. This is a huge issue for tech companies that rely on H-1B visas and skilled workers coming from outside the country. Does this give us any more clarity on how immigration policy under Donald Trump will play out?
You're right. I mean, he has been just in the same category as Trump when it comes to immigration. I mean, he has been very strong against what he calls illegal immigration. He actually defended candidate Trump during the campaign when he made comments about banning Muslims from the United States. He wouldn't defend that statement, but he did say Trump was bringing up an issue that people needed to focus on. So I think there is a lot of concern with Sessions and with the other two appointments about anyone I think who thought that governing would be a moderating experience under Trump. I think we're seeing that no, he's picking people who are in line with a lot of the views he expressed during the campaign.
Now, Jonathan, Jeff Sessions was also talked about as a possible candidate for Department of Defense. That did not happen. Now there's speculation about Tom Cotton, Senator of Arkansas. Defense Secretary Ash Carter has been out to Silicon Valley multiple times. We had an entrepreneur on a couple of days ago, Ryan Hindawi, who said he's met with him at least 4 or 5 times just in the last year. I actually sat down with Secretary Carter a year ago and talked to him about building this bridge with Silicon Valley that for a long time, the relationship had been broadly ignored. Take a listen to what Secretary Carter had to say.
We need to be a technology leader to protect our country. And we can be a technology leader only if we partner with folks out here.
As you know, Jonathan, Silicon Valley broadly did not support Donald Trump and was very vocal about it. What sort of bridge do you expect the defense secretary, whoever it is, to build or maintain with this part of the country?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, there's no doubt anybody in innovation knows that immigration has been a big driver of why this country has been so great at innovation, so we should all be concerned about that. Speaking more narrowly about national security, Ash Carter was part of a trend, but he didn't start the trend. I've been involved with DoD innovation for many years. The need for DoD to work with agile innovators in Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin, Washington, D.C., that is not a new thing. In fact, the Department of Defense has had a relationship with innovators in this country since the space race and even before. Silicon Valley got its start because of NASA and the need for semiconductor technology. I don't think it really matters who the Secretary of Defense is, frankly, because this is a big issue. We need the technology to drive our nation forward, and DoD R&D has been the backbone of every innovation that matters, including things like robotics, artificial intelligence, and other things that are now coming into the fore. So I do think it matters from the standpoint of policy and orientation. I think people in Silicon Valley are justifiably concerned about immigration. But make no mistake, innovation and technology and national security is very tightly entwined in this country and will continue to be so, whoever the Secretary of Defense is.
You did say, though, that this could be an opportunity for a reset between Washington and Silicon Valley. What kind of a reset do you think is needed and is likely?
Well, I think reset, what I was getting at is that Secretary Carter, the Department of Homeland Security, and other agencies have really made a big push to get out into Silicon Valley. And as you pointed out early in the remarks, This administration did not raise a lot of money in Silicon Valley, and it wasn't a candidate of Silicon Valley. So perhaps there's an opportunity for other regions of the United States to develop the same type of relationship, to have their innovators develop the same type of relationship that Secretary Carter and others wanted to have in Silicon Valley. What I mean by a reset is that one of the things that limited the success of these outreach efforts were how to engage in the government contracting industry. The reality is that companies like Booz Allen and others understand how to get technology into programs of record, and that is a big hurdle for young emerging companies to deal with. So when I say reset, I think there's an opportunity right now to look at the issues of acquisition reform, the issues of how to get technologies converted from early prototypes into programs of record, which is a really important challenge, and frankly, maybe more important for national security than reaching garage inventors when you look at things overall.
Last quick question for you, Bill. Jeff Sessions, as Attorney General, would be in charge of following through on Trump's promises to further investigate Hillary Clinton's email situation. Sessions had been supportive of a special prosecutor. Do you think this is something he'll follow through on?
I think that's ultimately going to be up to the president. You know, when Donald Trump did his interview last weekend, I think on 60 Minutes, he said that he didn't want to hurt the Clintons, that he thought they were good people after the campaign was over. So I think that's going to be something he'll have to decide early on. There certainly are people, whether Jeff Sessions is one of them, I don't know, but there are definitely people in the Congress who would like to see those investigations pursued to their conclusion. All right. Bill Ferries of Bloomberg News, who runs our national security team, Jonathan Aberman, founder of Amplifier Ventures. Excuse me. Thanks so much. Up next, the online home decor site House is moving into India, capitalizing on a market that's already has 1 million monthly unique visitors. Her thoughts on expansion and opportunities for tech IPOs next. This is Bloomberg. Turning now to House, the online home decor startup expanding to India. It marks the company's entry into its 14th market after establishing itself in Singapore, Australia, and Japan. Earlier, I sat down with Tatarko and started by asking about the launch in India and what growth opportunities she sees there.
Well, India has been a great market for us. We already have a prominent community in India. We have over 1 million community members that are coming to the platform every month, and more than 40,000 professionals that are already very active on the platform. And there was a strong demand from this community to localize the platform for them, as well as our users all over the world that are very, very interested in India and everything that comes from India, from ideas to product materials. So we felt like, okay, it's the right time to go into it.
It's obviously a huge market. How much business do you think it'll actually drive for House?
I think it's going to be very prominent, but like with every other country that we launched outside of the US, we're going to be very focused first, localizing the experience, making sure that we provide the features and the technology and the content exactly as needed by this industry in India. The monetization and the business will follow like we saw in all the other countries. It's going to be big.
There are obviously strong local players. Amazon is making a big bet on India. What do you think gives you the edge?
Basically, House is the only player in this industry that provides one end-to-end solution. Everything that people need, from the inspiration and ideas to the great service providers and professionals to product and materials. So really folding it all under one roof is something that only House can provide, as well as that global community. Mm-hmm. We found it very, very powerful when people can get ideas, collaborate, hire people from different places, as well as have access to product and materials from all over the world. We think that that's a big play for us.
So you guys have raised over $213 million, Sequoia, GGV investors. What's your take on the broader environment right now? A lot has changed very recently given the presidential election. How do you think that President Trump will impact the overall environment in general?
Well, in general, I think it's a good practice to build an independent company. Mm-hmm. And then all the options are going to be open to you. And we always did that. We know, Alon and I, how to build very lean companies. This is how we built it originally, in a very lean way. And this is how we kept growing it. The business followed the traction. And when you have the ability to choose whether you want to raise or you don't want to raise, everything is open, that's a good position to be at. In terms of what's going on with the election, I think that what we've seen in the industry and what we're hearing from our homeowners, first of all, the plans for renovation are starting way before the actual execution. So 6-9 months before. So many of these plans are being executed now based on things that people built a long time before the election. And really, when we are asking in the last few years, and we have hundreds of thousands of participants in our very long surveys, why are you renovating? Why are you decorating? Why are you doing something to your home? The number one priority now that we are hearing is to improve our quality of life, to improve the functionalities for our families. And you know what? No president, no election is going to interfere that. This is actually the secure place, the place where people feel like they have full control, full power to go and build something that they love.
So you mentioned Alon, your husband, who you built the business with. He is the president. What have you guys learned about working together? How has your relationship evolved as the company has grown?
We learned that actually having a co-founder that you truly trust and you know very well is very powerful. And we do know each other very well. We've been together for more than 20 years, understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses and what we're capable of is very helpful. Trust is a big thing. You need to learn how to put the boundaries between home and work. And I think, as the company grew and our kids grew, we had to reinvent ourselves every year again and again. But it's a fun adventure to have together. It's not for everyone, but it worked well for us.
All right. So on the topic of staying independent or being independent and giving yourself all of the tools that you need to do so, what are your plans for an IPO? How are you thinking about going public? IPO or any financing event was never a goal for us. It's important to provide liquidity to employees and to investors and to always be very thoughtful about these things, but it's not a goal. And I think that building a very strong company with a very strong business gives you the opportunity at any given moment decide whether it's the right time to go public or not. So we're definitely thinking about the right timing for different events, but it was never a goal. That was House CEO Adi Tatarko there. Coming up, have you ever wanted to back a startup but thought you didn't have enough money? Well-known crowdfunding platform Indiegogo is now opening the door to smaller investors. We'll break down the details next. This is Bloomberg. Two stocks we're watching. First up, Salesforce shares rose the most in a month after giving an upbeat forecast for fourth quarter sales. Software contracts with larger clients and recent acquisition benefits will boost sales in the current quarter. Also up, Marvell Technologies, shares of the chipmaker surging after announcing a $1 billion buyback and earnings that beat analyst estimates. Marvell agreed to reshape its board and replace its CEO earlier this year after coming under pressure from activist investor Starboard Value. Crowdfunding platform Indiegogo is stepping into the equity space. It's teamed up with MicroVentures to launch an equity crowdfunding portal. The new site will give entrepreneurs the option of offering investors an equity stake in their projects. For more on the launch, Indiegogo co-founder Slava Rubin joins us now from New York. So Slava, what exactly does this mean? Does this mean anybody can get an equity stake in a startup they back on Indiegogo?
That's exactly right. So we launched in January 2008, and now we're very excited to this week announce that we're entering into equity crowdfunding. When we came up with the idea in 2006, we actually wanted to do equity crowdfunding right away, but we learned about the rules that go all the way back to 1933 that really stopped us. And today we're able to launch something that changes that. Everybody in America who is of legal age can now invest in a company and be able to get the financial return.
So, Indiegogo was made possible in part by the Jobs Act, which, of course, came into effect under the Obama administration. What sort of policies do you expect from Donald Trump when it comes to entrepreneurs and small businesses?
Yeah, so Indiegogo was launched in 2008, so we were prior to the Jobs Act, but we were very excited to see in the Jobs Act in 2012 that they looked to release some of the rules around being able to invest as an individual into something called equity crowdfunding. So now it's 4 years later in 2016, it's finally live In terms of what we can see in terms of limitations, it seems like in the Trump market now, some of the financial institutions have had a bump because I believe they think that there's going to be some loosening of regulations beyond the interest rate pieces. If that's true as it relates to equity crowdfunding, this could be positive. I mean, the current state of the Jobs Act is you have a limit of $1 million a company can raise, or an individual can max out at $2,000 or $10,000, depending on their net worth, how much they can invest. There is the potential that with this current president-elect, there could be a little bit of loosening there.
Now, going through your numbers, you say that roughly 23% of backers have supported more than one campaign, which means that the majority of backers are supporting just one campaign. You know, what does that say to you? Does that say that investors are really doing this as a one-off, or that people really want to get into this as a career that they would like to repeat?
Right. So to date, no one has actually been able to invest until this week. So the stat you're referring to is in relation to a perks-based campaign where individuals are funding because they know the person, they want the product, or they want to participate in the movement. This is going to be a very exciting time. Most of America, over 98% of America, are not accredited investors, meaning they don't have $1 million of net worth, they don't make $250,000 of salary. So this is really opening up the market to most of America, over 98% of them, to now be able to invest in their local neighbor, into the local coffee shop, or into that interesting movie that they want to fund.
So, you know, as you mentioned, there's some variety in the kinds of businesses that are started on Indiegogo. Since 2008, what are the most popular kinds of businesses, and do you see certain trends sort of consolidating around certain verticals?
Yeah, so Indiegogo has been open from the beginning. So we've had creative projects, cause projects, and different products. But we're really seeing a lot of momentum in the last few years is really in those hardware projects, those innovations, whether it's Canary, which is a security device, which is out of New York and doing really well, or you have Misfit, which ends up selling after raising money on Indiegogo for over $200 million. I mean, right now on Indiegogo, you have Play Impossible, which is another one of those hardware devices, which is a ball that has smart sensors in it and connects to your mobile device. Now anybody can invest in that company.
Okay. Slava Rubin, Indiegogo founder. Slava, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Coming up, the firestorm over how Facebook and Twitter treat political speech continues to threaten trust in the social networks. We'll wrap up the week in social media controversy next. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of first word news. Acknowledging Zika is here to stay, the United Nations Health Agency is lifting a 9-month-old emergency declaration against the mosquito-borne virus. The World Health Organization is instead shifting to a longer-term approach. Nearly 30 countries have reported birth defects linked to Zika. The president of Peru warns that the U.S. presidential election is a sign of growing hostility to free trade that threatens the global economy. Pedro Pablo Kaczynski made his remarks at the opening of the APEC summit in Lima. He said global trade has already stopped in the last 2 years and would get much worse if nations close off their economies. Christine Lagarde, managing director of the International Monetary Fund, is attending the summit. In an interview with Bloomberg Television, she discussed one of President-elect Donald Trump's signature proposals.
We would be very happy to see investment in infrastructure, combination of public incentives and support and private engagement.
Lagarde said she hopes to work well with the incoming Trump administration. Polish President Andrzej Duda said he had a friendly phone conversation this week with President-elect Trump that helped ease concern over Europe's security and relations between the NATO allies.
He told me to stay calm, as surely cooperation between Poland and the U.S. will develop well, and that he as president will make sure of that. This to me was a very good signal. I'm very pleased by this because I have no doubt that the U.S. is Poland's strategic partner.
President Duda said he was reassured by Mr. Trump, whose campaign rhetoric raised questions about his commitment to the military alliance. The final rush of public opinion polls before next month's referendum in Italy reveals voters are leaning toward rejecting constitutional reforms. 4 surveys published today show the no camp in the lead. Prime Minister Matteo Renzi has promised to resign if voters reject the reforms, which he says would streamline government decisions. German Chancellor Angela Merkel may provide more details this weekend about whether she'll seek a 4th term. Chancellor Merkel will hold a news conference Sunday in Berlin after the first day of a board meeting of her Christian Democratic Union. The party's Congress is in early December. Cleveland School District will replace hundreds of drinking fountains, restroom faucets, outdoor spigots, and other water fixtures. This after high lead levels were found in the water at 60 buildings. Nationwide testing conducted this summer found that 9% of drinking water sources in school buildings in the U.S. exceeded standards set by the Environmental Protection Agency. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. In this edition of our Tech Week in Review, we're focused on social media. Facebook and Twitter are under extreme scrutiny for very different responses to backlash since the election of Donald Trump. On one hand, there's Facebook dismissing the influence of fake news. In a post last weekend, CEO Mark Zuckerberg wrote more than 99% of what people see is authentic. This makes it extremely unlikely hoaxes change the outcome of this election in one direction or another. It's been a very painful election for many people. Still, I think it's important to understand the perspective of people on the other side. On the other side, there's Twitter, this week enabling users to filter out abusive content, but also choosing to suspend a handful of accounts promoting the alt-right, a group tied to white supremacists and support for Donald Trump. Which leaves us with the intense and ongoing debate of who's doing this right. Our Bloomberg Tech reporter Sarah Fryer and Eric Newcomer are here, along with our billionaires reporter Tom Metcalf, to tie in Snapchat in just a moment. So we've come a long way in just a week. You know, at the beginning of the week, you have Mark Zuckerberg denying that Facebook had anything to do with the outcome. At the end of the week, you had President Obama talking about fake news running rampant on the site. Sarah, is there any indication from what you're hearing from within Facebook that Mark Zuckerberg is changing his mind?
I think that Zuckerberg is ultimately going to want to do what's best for the user experience. And in the past, they've actually polled their users, and the users don't like being misled by what they see on Facebook. So even if it's 1% of the news that's fake, and some people suggest it might be more than that, people don't want that, and it actually doesn't create a brand safe environment for Facebook. So internally, yes, there are people who are telling Zuckerberg, you need to take more responsibility for this. I think Zuckerberg, I haven't heard about his opinions recently, but he seems to be holding fast to the notion that he's not responsible in public.
Yeah, there are reports that employees within the organization are horrified and going rogue.
Protesting, and, having groups where they... and people have talked to me, too, current and former employees, about ways that they think of solving this problem that they just really wish could be implemented in a stricter way. And Facebook has tried to solve the fake news problem in the past. What's even more troubling right now is there's a lot more than just fake news. It's like propaganda sites that are getting spread.
And I would sort of quibble with, him talking about the quantity of news versus what the fake news actually is. When you have a story about the Pope endorsing Donald Trump that is completely untrue and has a major impact on the news cycle, at least for a time, that's a very important 1%, isn't it?
And 1% on Facebook's a ton of content.
It's a lot. It's a lot.
Right? I mean, a lot of Facebook isn't news. So if you're, not to sort of overly take Mark Zuckerberg overly literally here, but 1% would be a ton when you think about sort of the amount of content. And if a news organization had 1% of its content being fake, that would be super troubling.
No news organization would stand for that.
Right.
That was the point made by a former employee this week.
Yep.
Is just, Facebook has become such a data-based organization, but you have to think about things sort of beyond the data and think about their impact. Like even if 1% might be fine for an engineering error, but for the information that the public gets about critical election.
And I think
right, Eric, you wrote the column, our Bloomberg Tech column this week, where you took this issue on, and you had an interesting take where you said, bring back Milo. And so Milo is Milo Yiannopoulos, the Breitbart writer who was banned from Twitter.
Yeah.
Twitter has now gone on to ban other accounts tied to white supremacy. You say that's actually the wrong approach.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to sort of lay out a set of principles and say, you know, Twitter and Facebook don't have to be that different. They should let anybody publish on the platform. The problem with people like Milo is that they're creating this really toxic experience. So what they need to do is find ways to protect the user, say, make it easier to block people, and sort of find an experience that they find enjoyable. So on the one hand, let people publish, but on the other hand, give users more control over what they see. Facebook does a great job of that because they curate everything. Twitter does a terrible job of that because it's a totally sort of Wild West.
Eric, I wanna just
push back. What, you disagree?
So
Let's do it.
These social networks are not government organizations.
Yep.
They're not beholden to free speech regulations, right? These are companies with profit models, and in Twitter, in its case, it's not profitable, and they need to create a brand safe environment in order to attract advertisers. It's the same reason like Facebook doesn't allow pictures of breastfeeding, right? It's not because breastfeeding is bad, it's because they don't, and some people really disagree with that, but it's because they want to create an environment where advertisers want to spend money to put their messages next to this stuff.
And I recognize I have some subjective views here, but what I would say,
be principled about it.
For them, I'd say that's where their curated environments happen, right? So for Facebook, it's the feed where they're really calculating what should appear. Meanwhile, on your own wall, you should be a little freer to express what you want because it's just sort of a chronological account of everything you want there.
So here's the thing. You know, we've talked to a number of different investors. We talked to the CEO of Reddit in the aftermath of the election, and almost universally, they're saying that Facebook shouldn't be having more human involvement. You know, the idea is that perhaps human editors or human curators, more human intervention could have prevented things like this, which runs counter to Mark's claim that we're a tech company, we are not a media company.
I think either way, you know, however they want to solve it, it's going to be a human solution, right? These algorithms are built by people. Their preferences are fundamentally driven by the values and principles of their employees. So to say, oh, should people solve it or should algorithms solve it? It's the same people. It's just when they get off the train. You know, they're building the tracks. It's when they let the decision get made by a machine. But
all right, I don't want Tom to feel too left out here. You know, meantime, all this criticism is falling on Facebook and Twitter. Snapchat has filed for its IPO and seems to be blissfully avoiding any kind of controversy. I saw one tweet that said 100 million people didn't vote, but they stood in line for spectacles, which is you know, Snapchat's new video glasses that are being sold out of some vending machine across the country.
Very friendly one.
Tom, you have a news piece out about what the IPO could mean for the founders and their wealth. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I mean, the rumors that Sarah's been kind of reporting is Snapchat could hit 25 billion at an IPO, and based on the last funding round of 18 billion, pretty high, some people are saying. You've got Bobby Murphy and Evan Spiegel, the founders, still basically hold 38% of that company, according to data provided to us by Equidate. So at the moment, they're at a 2.9 billion fortune, but if they hit this $20 to $25 billion valuation range, that's a 40% rise. But then the question is, you know, this is like the definition of paper wealth, right? So you've got on one side people going, they'll never hit this. Then I spoke today to an analyst who was saying, trust me, I'm seeing all these sort of people desperately trying to subscribe to, you know, you can't do Airbnb, Uber, Snap, and basically he's pretty confident they're going to hit that IPO and just keep on going.
And you have comparisons to Uber and Airbnb, which, by the way, have not filed for an IPO. Snapchat has beaten them, at least as far as we know. Snapchat has beaten them to the punch. You know, what did you find?
Yeah, so Airbnb, the two guys, I mean, they've raised, I mean, Eric knows better than me, but billions of dollars, and they've still managed to hold, this is Garrett Camp and Travis Kalanick, about 23% of the company together. We don't know the precise split between them there. And then on the Airbnb side, you've got 3 co-founders, and that founder group has 42%. So that's, again, quite interesting that these massively successful companies, these founders have sort of managed not to get too diluted. It's not like a box situation where they're down to single digits. These guys have still hold massive positions, and I think as Sarah reported,
and they're maintaining control of the voting power, you know, even more so than Zuckerberg had or Larry and Sergey at Google. Evan Spiegel and Bobby Murphy will retain a vast majority of the voting control over Snapchat after the IPO.
And spectacles, are they going to add a lot to the bottom line?
Spectacles, it's so interesting. It's so hard to tell because it's such a small set of products that are available right now. People are standing in line for them.
There's the vending machine.
Yes.
That's where you can buy them.
People are saying, have you ever seen someone wait that long for a product from Facebook? Like, yeah, I've seen people wait in line to try Oculus, but this is a product that's really causing a lot of excitement. We've seen it go on eBay for $1,200. Like these.
Oh, I saw some higher prices on eBay.
Yeah, it was even higher, and people are buying them out of vending machines for $130, and they're putting these vending machines in really picturesque locations. They were up at Big Sur, Northern California. They started at Venice Beach. They've been in lakes. So they want people to put these glasses on, and they're just so easy to use that people are loving it.
And they're not giving them out to the media, right? There's no.
No, I haven't even got to try it yet.
I did get an email that said we are not giving these to the media. You can't try them unless you try really hard. Sarah Fryer and Eric Newcomer, Bloomberg Tech reporters, our billionaires reporter Tom Metcalf, thanks so much for breaking down the week that was.
Thank you.
Coming up, from Australia to Silicon Valley, the head of Melbourne's accelerator program explains why Aussie startups are eyeing a future in the U.S. and one that is good for both countries. This is Bloomberg. The heads of Melbourne's accelerator program are wrapping a week-long trip to Silicon Valley. Their pitch, Australian startups moving to the U.S., is a good thing for both countries. The director of that program, Roham Workman, joins me now here to explain why. So quite an interesting week to be visiting the United States.
It's very interesting.
And Silicon Valley, I'm sure. So what kind of people did you meet? What kind of companies did you meet with?
Sure thing. So we've had a program this week where we met with a bunch of different types of people. So investors, entrepreneurs, mentors, universities, given that we're from the University of Melbourne and Melbourne ourselves as well. And the real objective of the trip was to connect our entrepreneurs with people who could help them build their businesses.
Now, you have talked about why so many Australian startups are moving to the United States and why that's not actually a bad thing. What do you mean?
Well, there are two cities in the world that are synonymous with an industry, and that is Los Angeles and San Francisco for entertainment and technology and entrepreneurship. And I think that when an Australian goes to LA to try and break into Hollywood, we applaud them and say that's fantastic and go and have a crack. But when you go to previously, when entrepreneurs are coming over to Silicon Valley, we lamented the fact that they were leaving. But for us, I think we've moved on from that. And what we need is, Australia's a small market. We have 24 million people in Australia. You have 320 million people here. And so for us, if they are going to build a global business, they need to have global networks. So it's important that entrepreneurs from Australia are moving overseas, are forging networks and making relationships. And those things are beneficial for other Australians who are friends with them back home.
So do you think it's important for those companies to ultimately move back?
I think, the Australian in me, the patriot in me says I would like there to be a presence in Australia so that we can benefit from that as well. And, Melbourne is ranked as the most livable city in the world. So a lot of entrepreneurs who come over here do move back eventually for family reasons. But at the same time, there are plenty of people who've made a career and a life over in the US, but I think that's just part of the world we live in these days.
So what are some things you've learned on your trip, some things that may have surprised you?
I've been to Silicon Valley quite a few times, but I think it's been a really interesting week to be here given the election last week. But I think one thing that I was surprised by is the resilience of Silicon Valley and the fact that they are just going to get on and do things, which was, we didn't quite know how it was going to go this week, but that was for me the takeaway.
As somebody who lives in Australia from the outside looking in, what's your take? We've been talking a lot about what a Trump election means, a Trump presidency means for Silicon Valley, means for technology. What's your view as somebody who lives outside the United States?
Well, firstly, it's been very interesting to watch the election, I must admit. But I think for Australians, especially Australian entrepreneurs, a lot of them use the E3 visa to come and move to Silicon Valley. A number of our friends have come to do that. So I think the concerns around immigration are valid for Australians in particular. So I know that President-elect has kind of softened a little bit in his stance on those things, but hopefully that won't have too much of an impact for Australians.
Have you been talking to people who feel like they're in limbo?
Not yet, because I think they're all fairly pragmatic and they're biding their time. There's still a lot of time until he becomes president, and so I think it's a bit of a wait-and-see holding pattern at the moment.
What are the biggest challenges that you think Australian entrepreneurs face that you would like to change?
I think the first one is, Australians have a fairly self-deprecating and laid-back attitude. And so when you have an Australian pitching a business, they kind of say, oh yeah, I'm working on this idea and it's a pretty good idea and I think it's going to be quite good. And it could be the best company in the world, but they're not culturally going to go out and say that. Whereas in America...
Channel the Travis Kalanick.
Exactly
I am
right.
awesome.
Correct. I think, to be honest, Americans are a lot better at marketing than Australians, and so I'd like to see Australians having more confidence when they come over here because they can match it over here.
All right, interesting. Rohan Workman, Melbourne Accelerator Program. Great to hear the stuff that you're working on. Thanks for stopping by. A story we have been following. It is now official. DraftKings and FanDuel are merging after months of speculation. The tie-up creates a company that would control more than 90% of the daily fantasy sports industry and may raise antitrust concerns. Jason Robbins of DraftKings will lead the combined company as CEO, while FanDuel co-founder Nigel Echoes will chair the board. We'll see if a merger stands up through a presidential transition. Still to come, the real-life race to create superhumans. We'll head to Zurich for what's been dubbed the world's first Cyborg Olympics. This is Bloomberg. The world's first Cyborg Olympics is underway in Zurich. There, 66 teams from all around the world have paired up scientists, cutting-edge robotics, and physically disabled people to push the limits of aggressive assistive technology. Check it out.
66 teams from across the globe have come to Zurich for a unique competition. In a true blending of man and machine, people with physical disabilities are competing head-to-head. It's been dubbed the world's first Cyborg Olympics. The rules of the games are simple. Roboticists, neurologists, and other researchers are paired with disabled competitors that have been robotically enhanced. Races are based on different disabilities. The fastest time wins. The competitors are grouped as closely in ability as possible to avoid unfair competition. The technology can be conceptual or off the shelf. It just has to be safe. The mission? To improve assistive technologies and to better integrate those with disabilities in everyday life. I've come to the Swiss Arena to meet up with the team from Imperial College London.
Morning.
Kevin Evison has a cutting-edge robotic arm after an industrial accident more than 3 decades ago. A computer programmer, his mechanical arm has dramatically improved his life. He's competing in the arm prosthetics race, where he'll have to perform household chores like hanging clothes and cutting bread.
Twitching my muscle. I mean, you can see the twitch going up in the muscle there. By me twitching that muscle, I decide what level I want. If I want it to wrist rotate, I can do it on command. If I want to close the hand, it's there, it's instant.
The university is using his experience with the bionic hand to identify limitations of current technologies. The team hopes to use this info to develop and commercialize their own device.
What's up, Bloomberg?
Also on the Imperial College team is Johnny Beard Timms, who broke his neck in a trampoline accident when he was only 16. He can't move his legs, but by placing electrodes on his skin, he can pedal a modified bicycle.
One at the end of the muscle and one in the bulk. Same for the hamstrings and my glutes as well. And it comes out on these wires here. And then this box here, FES box, fires the muscles in a sequence and enables my legs to go round.
The electric shock being pumped into Johnny's legs would buckle you or me, but he can't feel it. The university is building AI that will monitor things like how tired his legs get. Cybathlon is not just an event to see who can run the fastest or jump the highest. Instead, it's how tech is helping people with severe disabilities do everyday tasks. Johnny blitzed his qualifying race and is through to the final. He starts strong, but quickly falls behind. His California competitor has some of the most advanced technology in the world. Johnny comes in second, but his coach Paul Moore couldn't be happier.
A quarter of my working week has been with the Cybathlon, especially in the last 6 months. I'm chuffed, excellent, I'm really pleased.
The research at Cybathlon has broad implications. Scientists believe studying people with severe handicaps can lead to building more nimble robots or even breakthroughs in self-driving cars. There are no cash prizes for the winners, but that's not the point. It's about pushing the limits of science.
Well, as if Elon Musk didn't have his hands full with the Tesla Solar City mega merger this week, the SpaceX CEO also asked permission to launch 4,425 satellites into space. SpaceX filed paperwork with the FCC to embark on an ambitious plan to provide global internet coverage. The satellites will fly lower than many currently in orbit, which in theory will provide internet at speeds similar to fiber optic cable. As of now, there are only about 1,100 active satellites in orbit and another 2,600 non-active ones up there. So SpaceX is asking to more than double the number of satellites circling the globe. We don't know yet when SpaceX will begin launching them, but it'll take an estimated 90 launches to put them all into place. And that does it for this Friday edition of Bloomberg Technology. Remember, all episodes now live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 6 p.m. in New York, 3 p.m. in San Francisco. Have a wonderful weekend, everybody. This is Bloomberg.